Well, what is going on here? I do declare you can't live on grass. What you need is a nutritious breakfast. There are 140 days of sunshine crammed into every box of Kellogg's Corn Flakes. So every bowl is full of sunshine. Cock-a-doodle! Good old Cornelius. Kickstart your day with Kellogg's Corn Flakes.
Well, I haven't got cornflakes, but I've got my shredded wheat, and I'm going to suggest to all of you, if you haven't got your breakfast and you haven't got your cuppa, stop the recording now, go and get it and sit tight, because my goodness me, have we got a bumper edition for you today. So today is the day, the grand finale of the novella. It's the day we've all been waiting for, and very soon you will find out how our little in-house drama concludes. Who knows? From here we could have publishers queuing up to publish this modern epic, filmmakers bursting down the doors of the Corona bunker, wanting the rights to this potential blockbuster. Watch this space. Talking of filming, it must be said that one of the greatest bunker pleasures is putting together our worship. It is really important to us that it's meaningful, accessible, and reflective. Trying to decide on the best way to capture the sentiment of the service and the Bible reading within it is important to us. As we film, we are certainly trying to ensure that it is our prayer and not just a film or someone simply saying words. We have, however, had a few mishaps along the way. It has all happened in the bunker. Fits of the giggles, accidentally kicking the tripod stand and jolting the film, getting tongue-tied, setting hair alight. That was yesterday's little catastrophe. Think we're all right still. Ad-libbing and saying something inappropriate without thinking, playing the wrong track of music at the wrong time, scenery collapsing. The list is endless. But hopefully, by the time it reaches you, it's all relatively seamless. Right. Now, John Mackenzie has sent in the perfect solution to the problem of dead flies. I'll have another slurp of that. You simply need to turn your dead fly into a work of art and hang it on the wall. And if you have a look in today's Viral Times, you will see the latest in our attempts to lighten up your day with some fly art. So meanwhile, however, Michael Entignap, one of the locked out St Mildred's sacristans, wants to know why there are flies in his sacristy. Now, the alphabet of church life today, we get to the letter S. S stands for safeguarding, Sunday lunches, sacristans. Sacristans are really getting a look in today. Safeguarding is the all-important work of ensuring that our church communities remain safe communities for all. With this in mind, we thank Katie Harper, Emma Isworth, Anne Bevan, and the recently retired Jackie Grant for their ministry as our safeguarding officers. Our fantastic teams of sacristans work behind the scenes to make sure that everything is set up for the services, and we thank them too. Now, there are quite a lot of them, so it's difficult to include them all by name, but you know who you are. So now Fiona Stevenson has sent in a cartoon to help you through your day today, help you to smile. Remember, a smile is the curve that makes everything straight. And we've also got some classic one-liners that have been listed. Now I'm going to leave you to read those for yourself today in the Viral Times. There are some great ones from several different comedies, sitcoms. And also, before we go any further with Countdown, which we were just about to go to, I need to apologise to Neil de Villiers. Having brushed lightly over his day of rest on Sunday, we omitted the reason, and Neil has been in touch. He said, "I feel very sad," sad face emoji. "There was no mention today of why I took a rest on Sunday. it was the Sabbath, and I was obediently observing Genesis 2:3, which says, "So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation." And he goes on to say, whilst the other countdown gamers were working on the Sabbath. Until recently, on some of the Hebridean islands, you would have been excommunicated from the We Free Church for such a transgression. What an inclusive church. Anyway, he said he feels better for yesterday's second day of rest after finding out he wasn't alone in failing. Now, if you have a little look on your Viral Times, you will find the solutions to yesterday's puzzles for the words and for the numbers. And also you will find out what today's letters and numbers are. We've also got a lovely couple of pictures sent in by Amanda Walker of her cat Ella. It's under the wonderful heading, "Get Me Out of Here." When you read it, you'll understand that probably better than hearing me try to pronounce it. But we bumped into Amanda yesterday, who told us all about Ella, who has been keeping her company during lockdown. So do have a look and read the story, and have a look at the gorgeous photos that she has sent us in. So, the novella. The big day has arrived, everyone, possibly the greatest day in the history of English literature. For here is the finale to the novella. Abruptly, the telephone on his desk rang out, and Mr. Champion responded with an anxious, "Of course," and, taking a surprised Alice firmly by the arm, he escorted her into the back office, leaving James alone in the room, suddenly with time to think. Before I read on, I'm just going to say that in order to conclude this properly, our author for today has done more than one paragraph. He dearly wanted to look at the intriguing documents on the desk, this is James, but fearing being found out, he awaited the champion's return. Minutes ticked by, and now he began to realise that so much didn't make sense. It appears that for so many years, Tenterden had been locked in a conspiracy of silence about the Homewoods, particularly the Rotter, son of James Homewood of War Memorial fame, except that over the last few days it had been broken dramatically apart by the testimonies of 4 key people. Firstly, Violet, who turns out to be his own mother's sister, and revealing his father's callousness in abandoning his pregnant wife Edith, and her parents' cruelty throwing her out to the care of an Aunt Ethel, apparently his very own grandmother, followed by his mother's early death. Then the old man at the bar of the Black Horse, with his tales of the Rotter, his father, and his sins and debauchery. Then Martha, the Homewood family solicitor's daughter and housekeeper at Homewood House, with her sad story of her father's suicide when caught up in a financial scandal with the Rotter. Lastly, by her mistress, so-called Lady Drury, who it seems was his father's second wife, unbeknown to the people of Tenterden. Her portrait of his father was of a reformed man, kind and a good husband. All this, he mused, brought up far more questions than answers. Alice, too, was a mystery. He'd fallen head over heels for her. I knew that would happen. He trusted her, but there was something worrying him. Why had she offered to write to her parents for information on the Homewoods, when he'd later been told they died tragically in France and before her 18th birthday? And why hadn't she been surprised by Reverend Fosdike's not being able to find the Homewood file in St Mildred's? But then it was she who had found the missing slip of paper, certifying details of his father's first marriage to Edith Alston, amongst papers Lady Drury had given them. Curiouser and curiouser, he was indeed down a rabbit hole. Time ticked on. He heard the church clock strike midday, and still Alice and her uncle did not reappear. Then it struck him that the real villains of the piece must be the Alstons, his maternal grandparents. They were the ones whose behaviour seemed consistently in the wrong. Surely no parent or grandparent would care so little for their child or grandchild as to cut them off from the family in this way, especially as the marriage, however unsuitable, was legitimate. No, there's more here, he thought. Moments later, Champion's secretary came in with a somewhat terse note, apologising for his delayed return. With no end to the delay in sight, and feeling in need of ale, James left for the Black Horse. It was very quiet at the bar, and after a few sips of old Obadiah, he asked the innkeeper if the Alston parents were still living in the town. "They've the old place at Small Hithe," came the reply, "but no one's welcome there, mark my words." He wouldn't be drawn as to details, so James decided he'd have to visit Small Hithe himself without further delay. He took a taxi from outside the blacksmith's and soon was on his way through the beautiful spring countryside. The Alstons' house was indeed a grand affair. How very odd that their daughter, Violet, had such lowly employment. Just as he started down the drive, he heard the front door creak open and saw Mr. Champion and Alice being ushered out by a servant. He threw himself into the hedge to avoid being seen, but Alice spied him, and a confrontation became inevitable. Mr. Champion looked extremely discomfited. Alice was flustered, and James demanded to know what was going on. "I think we'd better go back to the house," Mr. Champion said at last. "There's no escaping it now. The truth will out." The three of them walked uncomfortably together to the door and were reluctantly admitted by the butler to the Alstons' presence in the drawing room. Old Mr. Alston was indeed aged. He appeared almost fossilised in his embroidered silk jacket and a curious velvet cap. He sat on an old settle, surrounded by cushions. His wife, dressed in an austere black silk gown, was tall, and she stood beside him. It was she who spoke first. "So you are our grandson. I can't say I'm pleased to meet you." James wasn't so much taken aback by the sentiment, but by the manner of it ran through him like cold steel. Alice looked reproachfully at Mrs. Alston and then gave James a glance of encouragement as he started to ask his questions. He began with asking about the money his father had borrowed from them. It was all at the time the Tenterden bond had begun to unravel. He'd borrowed 1,000, then 2, then 5, all to keep up the appearance of the bond's integrity and pay dividends. Speculate to accumulate was his mantra. But seemingly, old Alston wasn't as daft as other lenders, and nothing had been lent without guarantee, and each time he'd increased the stakes, he'd increased the guarantee. The last £5,000 borrowed was against all the so-called Rotters' property and assets. They had him, of that they'd been sure, especially as the firm of Champion's solicitors had done their investigations into him and were prepared with and for the Austons to bankrupt him. It was at this exact point that poor Edith was taken advantage of by young Homewood. The Austons were indeed furious. This wasn't their plan for her at all. They wanted Homewood skewered. They insisted she married another, more suitable young man without delay. But Edith was determined Homewood was the man for her, and Reverend Fosdyke married them secretly and in haste at St Mildred's. It all goes on in St Mildred's. However, when Homewood realised that the bond had gone down completely and he was in absolute hock to his hated new parents-in-law, things changed. Champions, who'd drawn up the swingeing loan agreements, informed him all was indeed lost. The Austons said they'd pay him a sum to disappear forever from Tenterden, as long as he freed their daughter from her marriage vows. He agreed, thinking he'd been able to do the right thing for Edith and the child behind the Austons' backs and from a distance, and when his luck changed. Edith, however, was furious with her parents. They didn't need to throw her out. She was going. Violet never knew the whole story. Homewood left for France, full of promises to Edith, and Edith threw herself on Aunt Ethel's kindness. And the rest, they say, is history. Except that Aunt Ethel, James's beloved grandmother, never gave Homewood's money or letters from Paris to Edith. Poor Edith felt abandoned. The baby James was born, rightly given the surname of Homewood, but never told about his true parentage. And Edith died soon after the birth. Aunt Ethel decided that James's would be far better off not knowing, and she made up the well-meaning lies he'd so long believed. She determined to inform Homewood that both Edith and the baby had died. She was a good and loving woman and gave him a wonderful home and every security. It was only when he came of age that she regretted her decisions and decided it was time to set him on a quest to find the truth out for himself, as she couldn't bear, through guilt, to do it herself. It was by chance that she contacted Champions in Tenterden. She did not know Mr. Champion's involvement of the ruin of James's father. It may have been legal, what he did, but it was not moral. A man was ruined, his marriage taken away, his contact with his yet unborn child-to-be forever ended, and for poor Edith, the shame, the unhappiness was all too clearly her fate. Champion had carried this guilt with him all these years, and when James' grandmother's letter came, he was frightened. He asked his niece Alice to befriend James, to make certain he found out just enough to satisfy, but to keep him from knowing the truth of the whole ghastly affair. Champion, however, did not account for Alice falling in love with James, or being so spirited. She could not let James know half the story, so she went by herself to see Violet on that last day before the meeting at Champions and told her the truth. Violet was outraged at her parents' duplicity. They'd never seen eye to eye, but that morning she had visited them in Small Hythe and told them that if they didn't tell James the whole story, then she would. That was the urgent call. It was her parents, the Alstons, summoning Mr. Champion to decide on a plan of action. So it's now out in the open, Alice cried, thinking that it would now all be all right. James wished it could be, but he'd certainly need to talk to his grandmother, whose misguided actions had so confused his life. I'm grateful of this tea. The Alstons were never going to change their opinions. They were stuck in their ways and in their prejudices. It would take perhaps forever for them to accept James. So they parted as discomfited as they met. Old Champion was deeply regretful, and James forgiving, especially of Alice's part in the affair. After all, he was as in love with her as she with him. And so, dear reader, I must tell you that the mystery is solved, and they at least lived happily ever after. The end. There we have it. It's all revealed. I still haven't finished my breakfast. I nearly finished my tea though. Well, I have to say that our authors have done a splendid job with the novella. It really has been a tale of twists and turns, mystery and intrigue. But isn't it wonderful that it ended up with love and everyone living happily ever after? Well, there we go. That's the novella, and it probably is time for you now to go and find the rest of your day. If you didn't go and get your breakfast earlier, to go and get it. If your cup of tea is not cold, then to finish that up. Thought for the day is on your Viral Times with everything else, as is our prayers and the contact points that you may need today. But in the meantime, now all is sorted and James Homewood knows exactly who he is. All I can say is keep safe, keep praying, and keep connected. Goodbye.
They're gonna taste great, they're gonna taste great. I can hear the sound of Frosty's hitting me blades. They're gonna taste great with Tony and Nate.
Well, everybody knows Frosties taste great.
Even ladies who wait, or a pirate, and your teenage brother who's out on a date. If you live in Oz, mate, or the Empire State, even ladies with personalised number plates, or a bloke in a crate.